I'm Sarah Babb. I'm here at USB Ed with the We Read For You session. The book that I've been looking at is Grit by Angela Duckworth. She looks at grit as the combination of passion and perseverance, which we can grow through what she says is hope, interest, and daily practice. Interesting exploration of what grit is, why we need it, and how we can grow it. So the question of grit, it's Angela Duckworth. She shares quite a bit about her own life in the book. So the book is a combination of personal anecdotes, of research, of her own experiences, as well as what some of the findings are. She remembers as a child that her father said to her, "You're okay, but you're no genius." And this really struck with her. Was that a positive reinforcement or not a positive reinforcement? But somehow from an early age, it really reinforced for her to work as hard as she could, to make a difference, to persevere, because she almost wanted to prove that not that she was a genius, but that she could succeed. I think that's interesting, what experiences we have. And she actually ran a non-profit. She was a consultant with McKinsey in a high-flying job in New York, and changed that to say, I actually would rather, my passion is more about teaching children. And she then chose to become a teacher in a charter school, teaching maths to fourth graders, and which everybody was also questioning, how did you make that switch? And that intrigued her to say, well, what's the factor? How come I'm working with these students that they can get through the material, but somehow the ones that have more talent are not succeeding, where the ones that have been graded lower grade or less talent are succeeding? And she was like, there's something else going on here. If it's not talent, then what is it that's actually making the difference? So that caught her interest to study the psychology of success. What are the factors that contribute to our success? And in essence, that's where she started exploring grit and trying to name and find out what the issues were that allow some students to succeed, not others. So this is where the G.I. Jane imagery came to mind, because she went to, as an undergrad, to the Military Academy of the US West Point, which is the most elite institution. They've got this intense process of selection. 14,000 people apply and only 1,200 are admitted. So it's really an extraordinary process. But yet, in their first 7-week program, they call it the Beast, 1/5 drop out. So again, she was intrigued. How is it that you can strive for this, work so hard for it, get these perfect scores, and in the first 7 weeks, the majority of people drop out? She got the permission, because they also at West Point had been intrigued by this, and she developed what's called the grit scale. It's in the book, so you can also take your own grit scale, about asking, will you persevere if you fall down, those sorts of questions. They looked at the whole person scoring that Military Point had. They looked at the grit score. So even though you had a whole person high score, the people that succeeded tended to have a higher grit score. So she started building a construct of, so what is grit, but why it's important is that for her, all the research, and we'll share more of that, pointed to that grit is one of the best predictors of success. So what is grit, just to get straight to the point, and this is also what's interesting to me. So I had always associated it with perseverance or determination or stamina, but she adds another component that she found, that grit is also about passion. Do you have a sense of purpose in what you're doing? So the sorts of tests that they looked at sales and job retention within sales. So again, what is it that helps some salespeople succeed in sales, but that there's a very high attrition rate within the industry, within the sales profession? She then, because she was a teacher and passionate about children, also took this into the schooling system. So I had a large-scale survey with the Chicago public schools. Thousands of people completed the grit scores, and you won't be surprised to hear by now that those that were accepted and applied and went for college diplomas or were more likely to succeed had the grit factor. This is where she started to also say, but why is it that we still give precedence to talent? So we look at those people that we think will do well over those people that will literally persevere and make it happen. And so I quite like this quote, that our potential is one thing, but what we do with it is quite another. So this also took her into working with some people in the arts. What is it about their practice that enables them to succeed? And there she found the notion of deliberate practice, that it's not just that, oh, I'm doing it every day, but it's like, what am I going for? She's looked at swimmers and athletes. So when the swimmers are practicing their length, she said the one thing we revere is that they've won the race. So we see Michael Phelps, or we see people that have won the race, and we get distracted by their talent. They win the Olympic medal, or they win the race. And she said what we don't see is what goes on behind the scenes. So we don't see that getting up in this weather at 4 o'clock every day and training in a pool for laps, end on end, 8 hours at a stretch. And she said it's not just that they're swimming every day, it's that they're deliberately going for something in every session. And this is where she begins to challenge some of her McKinsey colleagues. Because if you think about the debate we're having in business about the war of talent, they just published a book which said we're looking for talented people. Again, we get distracted by who are the talented people. And that to her is where we have where she's also challenging us to say our society has a natural bias to what we call the natural talents. So we mythologize natural talent, which lets us off the hook, which I thought was quite an interesting take. So yet, again, through looking at all these examples in the research, she concludes that greatness is doable. Of course, you need some innate talent. I'm not a good swimmer at all, and I'll never claim to be. But if I had that innate talent and I worked at it, perhaps I could do better than I ever expected. And that grit is something you can expand, that it's actually about 4 things, which I'll talk through now. One of them being deliberate practice, daily habitual patterns of growing that mastery in the craft. So this is her little formula. Talent times effort equals skill. You still need to work at your talent. So consistency is a big thing. How many of us start something new, full of excitement and good intentions, namely New Year's resolutions, and then we give up sort of permanently when we encounter the first real obstacle? So grit is about saying the strivers are the ones that continually improve, and actually they're the ones that are accomplishing more and succeeding in the long run. So she said passion is what's so important because it's that compass. And she has an interesting correlation of goal hierarchies. So we're often working daily at goals, but we can forgo the smaller goals. But what keeps us going is if we have that longer end-term passion and purpose in mind. So she says it's not just something you care about, but it's something that you actually have, in her words, an abiding, loyal, steady conviction that it's that destination, that focus, and that priority, that every day you've got that priority that sort of informs your decisions and your actions. And it's holding that top level goal in our mind. So she actually concedes then that grit is not about just sticking to something that might be wrong at the end of the day. It might be the wrong strategy, the wrong focus, the wrong talent. But she said you need to know then that your lower level goals will change. So she says she does this with her children. She has 2 children, 2 daughters. And her one thing she says, in her family they've got a commitment to one hard thing. So her child, one tried ballet, the other tried piano, the one didn't like ballet, ended up doing music, but she insisted they stick to it for a certain period of time to build that grit capacity. So we'll come to parenting. But I thought it was quite interesting because one of the things she insists on as leaders and parents is that because grit can grow, you emulate your leader or you emulate your parents. So as a parent, if you are a parent or even if you are a mentor to a child, how are you modeling grit yourself? So it is the notion of try and try again, but it's with that goal clarity and that self-belief. And this comes to the factors then that she says are the ones that we want to mature in our grit. So the first one is interest. So passion without interest, she says, is a bit foolish because that won't be sustainable. So what are you passionate? What's your purpose? What are you interested in? Then it's about the daily practice. So it's every day. Is there a practice? Is there a habit of building towards that? And what is that purpose? And essentially her message is that everybody's work matters. And sometimes when we're in jobs that don't necessarily feel purposeful, it's about reframing, but what value am I adding? How is this reinforcing my value? What contribution am I making to a bigger picture? And of course that brings in the notion of hope. So hope. Do we have hope that our work will make a difference? Do we have an inclination that we can succeed? So she comes back to the question of grit paragons worked hard at finding their passion and their purpose. And she said somehow movies and our wish is that we would suddenly have this awakening and dawning on us that this is our passion. And she said actually what she found from the grit paragons is that it was not a cinematic moment. I like that phrase. So it wasn't this aha, and we suddenly woke up and knew that this match was there. And that's also another thing, that we can't just sit and go into a retreat and think about all these things, but it's through experimentation, falling down, trying, growing, that we get to find what's important to us. One thing that she does say is that this is also not a solo journey, that there will be peers or parents or colleagues that at some stage might give you information, stimulation, or even hard feedback at some stage. And so her suggestion is also to find support. And some of the questions she says you can be asking yourself for this is, so what do I like to think about? Where does my mind keep going? What do I care about? What matters to me? How do I enjoy spending my time? And equally, what do I find absolutely unbearable? Because that should be avoided as well. There is the question of, but is grit just painful? You know, do we really want to endure this sort of painful life? And she was working with Csikszentmihalyi, who you would know his work around flow. He says, but if you're successful, you're also in flow. So what's the difference between grit and flow? And in essence, what she found is that so grit people actually experience more flow. Because they're practicing and getting better at it, they get into that sense of flow, which is almost the confluence of talent and passion, that work becomes easy, that time flies by, that you achieve things in an effortless way. She's encouraging, and what she's learned from people that are successful is that it's unpredictable. That in essence, one of the things we do need is, again, that link with hope, that do we have a role model, that when we're not sure, feeling a bit lost, that we've always got a sense that we can keep going, that there will be success, that we can achieve things. And this is the hope. So hope is the expectation that your own efforts can improve your future. If you're hopeless, you feel that your own efforts won't change things. And suffering is when you think you can't control, that you're hopeless. And what they did studies on was learned helplessness. That it's not something you're born with, you can learn helplessness. How do we grow our mindset? How do we expand our understanding of ourselves in those situations? And that the same events can lead to different interpretations, feelings, and behaviors. So how do we work with mindset and what she says, optimistic self-talk, that'll lead to you persevering as opposed to learned helplessness. Optimism is, I like this definition too, is those people that habitually search for temporary and specific causes of suffering. Whereas pessimists assume permanent, pervasive causes are to blame. So we've looked at purpose and passion and hope. So what are some of the other factors here? She does talk quite a lot about parenting, but she also emphasizes not just that you're a parent, you might be a mentor, you might be working with young people that you connect with. And she talks about the balance of wise parenting. So the need to not be over supportive or over demanding. Because she's committed to schools, she also got a lot of funding from the Gates Foundation to look at schools. And an interesting thing she found, which I've touched on, is that extramural activities are essential. We've spoken a bit about the culture of grit, that we can create not just as lone people, but you can create institutions, organizations, families that encourage this grit, the perseverance, and the passion. Grit, she says, is the most predictive, but of course other attributes are important, or what she calls virtues are important. And she says if she has to be pushed to it, one of the highest virtues she says that's important for success is morals, but also that social intelligence, that gratitude. So how do we can have grit, but how do we also relate to people makes a difference. So do we have those virtues? And of course the intellectual curiosity, and I love her word, zest. And so the character, she says, is those clusters, but grit always stands out as the most predictive, and that we can grow it. And this is a final quote then from her book, is that we all face limits. Not just in talent, but in opportunity. But more often than we think, our limits are self-imposed. We try, we fail, and we conclude we've bumped our heads against a ceiling of possibility. Or maybe, after taking just a few steps, we change direction. To be gritty, she says, is to keep putting one foot in front of the other. To be gritty is to hold fast to an interesting and purposeful goal. To be gritty is to invest day after week after year in challenging practice. To be gritty is to fall down 7 times and rise 8. So that's the final message, I think, from the book.